So for a look at the role social media played in some of the biggest stories of 2015, I'm joined by Ramona Pringle. She teaches digital media at Ryerson University in Toronto, and she joins us here in studio. Thanks for coming in this morning.
Hi.
How would you say technology apps have changed the way we experienced 2015 compared to other years?
Well, I think when it comes to the news, there's a couple big changes. One of the biggest is the fact that we're constantly connected. Because we have mobile devices, I think that the stats from the UN say that there's almost as many mobile phones on Earth as there are humans now. That means that we're constantly connected to the internet, and it's no longer the time where you were driving to work in the morning and you were listening to CBC Radio to get your news, or you read the newspaper in the morning and skimmed the important stories really from the day before and then got your 6 o'clock or 11 o'clock news. Because we're constantly connected, really whether or not you're on Twitter, if you're on Facebook, even just being online, you're getting hits of news throughout the day. So it's real time, which changes our involvement in stories because it's not processed. And that's the other piece of it, is that there isn't necessarily the same gatekeepers. So where there still is, the New York Times and the Guardian and CBC who are producing editorial content, to keep up with that 24/7 influx of news at all times means that there isn't always the editorial, there isn't always the gatekeeper that's there. And I would say that as we've seen, for better and for worse.
Okay, so which technology apps would you say have changed the year?
Well, it's interesting. Periscope was named, Apple every year chooses their app of the year. And it seems like, it's entertainment, it's trivial, it's games, it's this and that. They identified Periscope, and Periscope is an app that lets people live stream video from their mobile phones to an audience around the world, which is really unprecedented because in the past, just 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it would have taken tens of thousands of dollars and you would have needed a news truck. And how would you broadcast? How do you even get that audience? But now anyone, anywhere, with a mobile phone is able to broadcast to the entire world. And that changed stories. You talk about the gatekeeper and you talk about real-time news. Some of the biggest stories of the year, if you think of the protests that we saw over the summer around Black Lives Matter and following, Freddie Gray, those are stories that once upon a time would have been covered from the outside, depending on the perspective of the journalist who was covering it and who had access, but quite often from the outside looking in. And all of a sudden, what you've got is people who are inside of those protests, where it's not just, the mob or the riot, but people who are there who are concerned about their communities, who are mothers and cousins and bus drivers and teachers, and they're real human beings who are there. And it means that people, I think, who wanted to show their support were able to do it in virtual ways as well. So I know there was a young woman who I spoke to who had wanted to fly down, and Air Canada or whoever she had booked her flight with actually stopped booking flights into Baltimore over the summer because of increasing violence, they said. And that's how she discovered Periscope. So it's both to be able to share stories, but also to be able to, what she commented on was the stories that she ended up being able to hear, the voices and perspectives, were ones she may not have been able to access through mainstream media otherwise. So
right. And
really
it's a reliable
changing
source too, as opposed to someone just posting something on YouTube and claiming it to be what they say it is, right?
Well, and this is where, that's also where it gets complicated is, I think we're seeing, it's authentic. Now, whether or not things become reliable, we do see, in the case of, those protests, it's reliable because you're right there in the moment. But I think that's been one of the tricky points, and that's where, there is this negotiation between journalists who are trained and have journalistic ethics and are thinking through what content do we need to show and what becomes, digital rubbernecking. At what point do we have this sort of post-traumatic stress that we're collectively suffering because there isn't necessarily the gatekeeper. So on a site like Twitter has had to really debate, well, how much do we censor and do we let ISIS put up beheading videos? And when, if we start making these rules, where do we draw the line in other places? So it's definitely complicated territory right now.
And we still have to apply journalistic ethics as well and use some editorial
That's
insight.
right. And I think that's where, it's challenging because with the internet you see, that a lot of newsrooms start to suffer and jobs start to suffer, and yet what we also see with the influx of news, with the constant flow of information, with less and less gatekeepers, that we do need those journalistic ethics and people making decisions about what pieces of those stories really do help shape the greater good. Because otherwise, I think there's a danger of us all suffering exhaustion because there's too much it becomes media
Yeah.
as opposed to really stories that are going to help us vote better and be more compassionate and make better decisions.
Well, I'm glad you said vote because elections were a big deal in 2015 here in Canada, the federal election, but also we're following the developments in America as well. So quickly, I want to ask you, how do you think social media played a role in Justin Trudeau's campaign?
I think that this was our social media election, for sure. The first time that Obama was voted in, it was, I think, the first time that we saw a social media election. And I think after that, there was really no turning back. And what people saw is it was a way to engage another demographic, maybe younger demographic as well. And we definitely saw all of the parties using social media. Although one of the things that I kept commenting on, I think that we kept seeing, was that there was this, it was a bit of a myth that being on Facebook was enough, that being on Twitter was enough, and not fully embracing the affordances of what these platforms really do, in that it's not just about putting your standard press release out in 140 characters or in a Facebook post or getting a photo and putting it on Instagram. These are two-way communicative platforms. These are interactive platforms, and the opportunity that I actually think was missed kind of across the board was really to engage with the public, was really to hear what was important to people. But I do think, it also speaks to Trudeau's success in that the internet aesthetic, and certainly if you look at the success of YouTubers, the aesthetic that's there is no longer the sort of magazine cover, perfect, flawless, photoshopped aesthetic. It really is seeing real people, seeing them in their bedrooms and in their basements and seeing the inside of their fridges. We want that authenticity and transparency, and I think being able to see different sides of his life and see him as a real human being was a successful use of social media for Trudeau.
Well, Donald Trump makes himself quite accessible. I mean, he gets a lot of people on Twitter just by retweeting them or responding to all the tweets he gets. I think he might be the most effective right-wing politician I've seen on social media.
Well, I mean, if the internet is good at anything, it is creating memes and taking short, buzzy, clickbait headlines and making them popular. We will, I mentioned digital rubbernecking, like passing a car crash. If something is big and bold, regardless of whether you think it's beautiful or offensive, you will stop and look. And I think that that's a lot of what we're seeing, is whether you support, whether you're against, for better or for worse. With someone like Donald Trump, in the digital age, it's still about, what's going to show up in your Google search and what's going to show up in the top of your feed. And there is still the power of celebrity or the power of a brand. Coca-Cola still reigns supreme because it's dominating searches, let's say. But I also think we're seeing it in terms of the backlash against Donald Trump and his comments as well, that what may have slid through the cracks in previous elections, let's say, because you maybe didn't see the speech in real time on the news or the debate, or maybe it didn't make its way into the next morning's paper. Everyone becomes a bit of an editor at this stage, and people will pull a line, and it'll end up on social media, and you'll get called out for it. I think you have to be able to stand behind what you say in a way that is unprecedented.
All right, we have to leave it there, Ramona, but thank you so much for this insight.
Thank you.
Ramona Pringle, she teaches digital media at Ryerson University in Toronto.